Hi everyone, welcome to this KHERSON episode special. I'm Georgi with Ukraine Matters. I am really hoping you're experiencing the same uplifted emotions that I am having because Armed Forces of Ukraine has delivered to us another great victory and probably the biggest one to date. It's obviously not the last one in this coming war, but it is definitely the latest. And the victory is a great indeed. But let's quickly jump to the map where I can explain you what happened, what is happening, and what will happen. So first, let's cover what happened. Russia was positioned on the north side of the Kherson Oblast, beyond the Dnipro River. It was hanging on two threads of supply lines over the Novokakhovka Dam and the Antonovsky Bridge. Despite the best Russian efforts, they were able to sustain this grouping only partially. The big blows came in when there was a hit on the Kerch Bridge, which significantly reduced the supplies that could be sent to the Kherson Oblast. And second big hit came in when the attack of Ukrainians on the Pavlivka, which is very important to sustain deliveries to the Kherson Oblast from this road, this way essentially. And that led basically the Russian command to understand the fact that they cannot hold Kherson Oblast again. It was a lose-lose situation because if they stay, it's just a bloody wound that would just bleed and bleed and bleed because they needed really good troops here, so no lines would collapse because it was a very difficult position to hold. So it couldn't be just mobilized troops. And secondly, then these troops cannot participate in other combats and they always need to be supplied, and they also being shot at and being slowly, methodically killed. That is not an ideal situation. And if they retreat, which they do now, they basically lose political power. It's a disaster for the Russians. We're going to talk about it more, but the point is that it was Putin's main victory in Ukraine to date. Kherson is the biggest and the most important city that Russia was able to capture. Second after Kherson is only Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, but they are way less valuable in a sense of political clout. So Kherson is a regional center. And what is worse for Putin is that he claimed that this is now Russian land. So essentially they are withdrawing from the Russian territory, which is a complete political disaster for Putin. But I want to say a couple of words because there are some misconceptions that's going around. As you can see, Ukrainians advancing quite fast because I'm pretty sure you can notice that the territory of this Russian control is getting significantly smaller. But important part is some people said that it was mobilized troops that were sent to Kherson Oblast North. That is not true. For multiple weeks now, I've been telling you, it's the well-trained personnel that is being sent. Less capable troops are being sent out of the northern Kherson. And now we know why. They were preparing for something like this. We know that they're making defensive positions here. Russians are falling essentially from the first defensive positions to the second, to the third, and they're using a lot of mining equipment and they're using engineering equipment to essentially get over the obstacles and then blow up the bridges and so on. So they're trying to slow down Ukrainian advance as fast as they can, so they have a planned withdrawal. For that, they needed battle-capable troops, the ones that really know how to execute those complex maneuvers. And they're trying to do. What we need to be aware of is Chernobyevka and Berislav. Once Ukraine controls either of those settlements, that is basically a control over the crossing over the Dnipro River. And the unfortunate truth that we might say is that Ukraine, unfortunately, does not have enough weapons to establish a complete fire control over the longer range over this crossing. So a lot of the Russian troops will escape. However, we see that the territory is shrinking really fast, and it's very, very thin balance that Russia is walking right now. They have all the chances to just making some mistake, and then Ukraine will exploit it, and then this whole situation might turn into a complete military disaster. So, yeah. But don't get me wrong, it is still a huge defeat for the Russians. But what will happen now that the Russians are retreating? Well, obviously, They will take these troops because there is a lot of battle-capable troops. There is like about 20, 30,000 of battle-capable troops. They will mix it up with a lot of mobilized troops, and they will use it to send some other directions. I'm going to talk in my next map update video about where they're going to be used, what is the potential usage for these troops, but it's definitely known that they're going to be used to essentially make a big attack somewhere to use it as a core of the army. That is like, you don't need to be super military analyst to understand that. Like even laymen like me can pretty much put two and two together. With that said, let's talk about why it is a disaster for the Russian military. Let me just quickly open my notes and let me start talking. So while this is a planned withdrawal, it is a withdrawal nonetheless. And I already mentioned that it is a political defeat for Putin. So why is the political defeat for Putin so important? It is because once he started this war, Putin, from a dictatorship stand of view, he stopped being just a dictator of the country, a peaceful country nonetheless. He became a military dictator. And a military dictator is a very bad position to be in because he is now under pressure on having success on the battlefield. The successes on the battlefield are what defines military dictators' claim to power right now. That's the only thing basically that matters. A lot of the population are pretty much ready to forgive him a lot at home, just saying, okay, well, we're winning the wars, it's fine, because this is not like a small war like with Georgia. No. This is a full scale, like he's mobilizing. Like when he's mobilized people, that's when basically the breakaway, like the key got broken basically. So he turned the car and that's it. It's either go or no go. And that is really bad. Right now, the Russians are still kind of, the temperature in the Russian society is just climbing. Once there is a flag over Kherson city, that's when it's going to start getting really bad. And this is going to be another loss in the situation. They obviously build up the Suraviking as essentially this person to put the blame on. That is fine. That is understandable. But it will still reflect in Putin's rating nonetheless. They were trying to prepare people in Russia to get this to see. They were saying, oh, it's going to be very bad, like heavy decisions need to be made about Kherson and so on. Bullshit. Now, why is it important for Ukraine? Well, it's a big victory for Ukraine because if you haven't watched my video about the big Ukrainian gamble, watch that. I already talked about during the Kharkiv offensive that Ukraine technically won the gamble because the gamble was around the Kherson Oblast where Ukraine said, give us the weapon now as much as you can and we will deliver. Weapons were given. Ukraine technically delivered when they captured a lot of Kharkiv Oblast. However, now that the primary objective is reached with the Kherson now being liberated, and I want to say right away, this is not a trap. Like the Russians are actually withdrawing, but they're doing it like very, very carefully. So that is a withdrawal. That is not, they're not planning a trap there. But this is a win. This is a clear win of the gamble. So that means now all the voices that were saying that Ukraine can win are now saying it a lot louder than before. Additionally, Ukraine was attacking on this direction. It was a hard direction to attack into. So a lot of Ukrainian forces needed to be present at the area. There's about 30 to 40 battle-capable Ukrainian troops, and I mean like battle-hardened, really veteran troops for Ukraine that were used in this assault. If Ukraine we are to believe what Ben Hodges is saying, then the next probably direction Ukraine would like to attack in would be around Melitopol, Zaporizhia area. But we're going to talk about it during the next update. This one is about Kherson. That's a lot of power. That is a lot of power that Ukraine is getting back, basically. And Russians, they've lost a lot in this area. And they've definitely become weaker, while Ukraine kept all of their forces quite powerful. They didn't try to advance right away into a meat grinder. So good job, Ukraine. Perfect execution. Now, a lot of people are talking about, and I also again talked about this. I'm going to link another video. I'm like, this is kind of starting repeating myself, but I guess that's how YouTube works. But I've talked about the video that Putin is trying to use any channel that he can to kind of force this perspective about the fact that Ukraine should start negotiating with Russia about essentially ceasefire. Maybe Russia will kind of, yeah, you see, we're giving away Kherson, so let's sue for peace. We just keep Crimea. Maybe we'll keep like pre-23rd, like maybe we'll give away everything else, but just keep like the pre-February 24th kind of lines. So whoever is saying this is in a complete misunderstanding of the situation on the ground and situation that is happening, period. I have 3 points to make about this. And point number 1 is the fact that we have a big arrogance about us that makes us no better than, for example, Putin. Like, I mean, people that are making the arguments that Ukraine should negotiate. A lot of the people here in the West, we think that Ukraine does not have its sovereignty, that Ukraine can make decision on their own. We are essentially thinking no much better than Putin when he's claiming that Ukraine is a puppet of the West. So some of the people say, well, if the West just tells Ukraine to stop, Ukraine will stop. This kind of brings me to the second point, which is where just being arrogant about it and just thinking that like, oh, we just control Ukraine, so if we say Ukrainians to stop, they will stop, to kind of brings it also to some kind of logical rationalization error. And the error goes about this way. We give Ukraine weapons. Therefore, Ukraine fights. Therefore, Russia does not win. The problem of that thinking is that we are setting the sequence wrongly. The correct sequence is actually Ukraine fights, we give weapons, and then Russia doesn't win. We, under our own arrogance, and again, our kind of flawed assumptions about this, think that if US or Europe or anyone else stops giving Ukrainian weapons, they will stop fighting. Essentially blackmailing Ukraine, saying that, well, you'll have to lose if you don't want us to essentially, if you don't negotiate, you will lose essentially to the Russians. And they completely misunderstand the situation. Ukrainians are now actors. They are sovereign nation. They have their own voice. And Zelensky has said it multiple times. And Ukrainian people have said it multiple times. Ukraine is fighting this no matter what. If you give them weapons, if we give them weapons, they will fight better. If we don't give them weapons, they will fight with what they have. If necessary, with sticks and stones. It is not a question anymore for Ukrainians if to fight. It's with what to fight. Zelensky said it day 1, or like, was it day 2 or 3? It's like he doesn't need a ride. He needs ammo. That's it. That's been the only request for Ukraine from the West. Like, think about it this way. Ukraine never asked the West for, like, well, okay, there was like helps, like, you know, like, can you close the sky at the first months? But there was the request. But most of the requests were, it's like, if you don't want to do anything, just give us weapons. We're just going to fight it. Ukrainians are ready to fight. Ukrainian government is ready to fight. And this brings me to the last point, the third one, which is not only about arrogance, but it's just maliciously thinking about this. We're thinking that if Ukraine is just going to give up some land, then we're going to go to the pre-24th of February world. That Russia is suddenly not this big threat anymore, that we can have business as usual, that there are some negotiations. But the consequences of that are a lot more serious. Firstly, if all of the West would withdraw support for Ukraine, Ukraine would continue fighting. Secondly, there are some Eastern and Central European states that would not pull support for Ukraine. I'm pretty sure you're aware who I'm talking about. Moreover, these states would take it as a personal offense for them to give up on Ukraine, because many times has been said that we will support Ukraine no matter what, until the end. So if the war doesn't matter, would it make sense that Article 5 doesn't matter as well? That would be a big disaster for the NATO alliance. And I'm not sure that it would pay off, especially now that we can see Ukrainian can just do it. You know, it's just money. Who cares? US have all the money in the world. Whenever I hear like people from US saying, oh, we're paying, like, you have all the money and all the power in the world. Remember that. You are the most powerful world's nation. Why are you counting every dollar? That doesn't make sense. And finally, and most fundamentally important to understand this, Ukraine is not fighting just for land. Whenever you're talking with a Ukrainian, a soldier, or even a civilian, and ask him, why do you fight? Like, do you need that territory? It's not about the number of square kilometers. It's not about the number of settlements captured, something that we really like to discuss on this channel as well. But it is about over 500 or 600 dead civilians. It is about people of Ukraine, friends and family members that got tortured, raped. How do you live with that? How people that the whole nation said, we're going to fight until the end, and we're going to avenge every single one of those tears that came out of our children's eyes. Children that have had to spend their time in the bomb shelters while there were missiles flying and destroying their schoolyards, killing their friends, family, making millions of Ukrainians leave the country. How do you cope with that? Ukraine is not fighting this war for the land. It is not like just a resource war that a lot of the academics that want to have a neutral perspective on the war, that are trying to understand and rationalize everything. This is a patriotic war for Ukrainians. This is the war for nation. This is the war for freedom. This is the war for Ukrainian national sense. It is deeply emotionally and personally important for every single Ukrainian to fight and win. No matter how much weapons we remove, if you want to be like that, every single Ukrainian will still fight and die if needed. But they won't, because they will win, and we will have more great days to celebrate great victories over the orcs. Slava Ukraini. I love you all. See you next time.